Go ahead, Sherry. We're live.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Board of Education Ad-Hoc Inclusion and Educational Justice Committee meeting. Today is Wednesday, May 7th, 2025, and the time is 6:06. Joining me tonight is Board Member Howard White. Board Member Karen Nelson-Bakey is not able to attend. Also with us tonight are NPS staff, including Deputy Superintendent Ms. Sandra Fayowis, Director of Research and Accountability, Ms. Diane Filardo, Executive Directors of Leadership and Development, Ms. Allison Breedy Johnson and Ms. Mary Ann Shepard, Director of Educational Data Strategy, Mr. Alden Burnham, and also with us tonight from Leading with Hearts and Minds is Mr. Paul Forbes. Did I miss anyone?
No, you got everybody. Thank you for doing that.
Okay. First, I will entertain a motion to approve the March 5th minutes. Mr. White, would you please make a motion?
Yeah, motion to approve March 5th minutes.
Thank you, and that motion is passed. And next on the agenda will be a welcome from the staff and a presentation on the Panorama Survey and SAT results.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chair McCready-Pritchett, and hello, Howard, and everybody else that has joined us. I'm going to share my screen, and as people present, please tell me to advance. And at some point, I'm going to stop sharing because Mr. Forbes is going to share his own presentation, even though it's part of the larger deck, but he has a video that he will be sharing also. And please feel free to interrupt us throughout. This is our year-end wrap-up, so we want to make sure that we give you the opportunity to ask us plenty of questions and that this is a conversation between the committee and hopefully the staff can help. Of course, this deck was put together by everybody on this call, so I thank everybody in advance for your participation, not just in today's meeting, but also in the work that we have done this year. There's a lot to celebrate and a lot to share. Without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to minimize myself, but these are the topics that are going to be reviewed. So we're going to hear first from Diane Filardo about the Panorama Survey and some SAT results. Diane?
Good evening, everyone. This will be a continuation of what many of you heard yesterday on the Panorama Survey, but tonight we'll dig a little deeper and look at some results, some SEL results by subgroup. You can advance, please, Sandra. So this group really is leading the charge in terms of looking at data through an equity lens. And if you look at the third bullet, examining participation rates and disaggregating student groups, that is what we'll do a little bit of tonight. We are still in the process of doing this work. The survey actually closed mid-April. And as you heard last night, students in grades 3 through 12, our staff, our teachers, and families all participated. And the surveys were available to everyone in English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. And the surveys were anonymous for our teachers, staff, and our families. And we will be continuing looking at reviewing our data, particularly at disaggregating groups of students. Next slide, please. First, let's take a look at the topics. Our students took 2 surveys, an SEL survey, and the topics there were growth mindset and emotional regulation. And then they took a school survey with the following topics: relations with teachers, school belonging, rigorous expectation, school engagement, school climate, and safety. our teachers and staff looked at educating all students, the faculty growth mindset, relationship with staff and leadership, relationship with families, school climate and safety, and finally families, family support, school and district communications, school climate, and school safety. So all stakeholders had 2 topics, and that was the school climate and school safety. Next, please. Now let's take a look at our SEL trends. Again, within SEL, the 2 topics were growth mindset and emotional regulation. And you can see a trend over 3 years. And so there are 2 different surveys. One, even though the topics were the same, the questions differed slightly for students in grades 3 through 5, and then those in grades 6 through 12. And you see the trends between 2023 and 2025. Although we've given the surveys now for 6 years, the topics have been the same since 2023. So we see that in general, regardless of whether elementary or secondary, you see that our secondary results, which are reported in percent of favorable responses, is somewhat lower than elementary school. Next slide. To give you an idea of the type of questions, within each topic, there are multiple questions, and each question does have a response, percent of favorable response, and then the entire topic has an overall favorable response. And you see that at elementary level for emotional regulation, you see the item analysis. I think you can see these questions, but I'll just read a couple. How often are you able to control your emotions when you need to? And at the elementary school, that was a 55% positive response, and that was up from last spring. Looking over on the grades 6 through 12, how often are you able to control your emotions when you need to? 54% positive response. And you can see that the percent positive overall remained just about the same for 6 through 12, but there was a slight increase in comparison to 2024 for the 3 through 5. The number of questions, sometimes there's a few more questions for the upper grades, and sometimes the complexity of those questions and the language is somewhat different. Clearly, that's the idea of a good survey. Next. So we're looking at now we're looking at results by some of our major subgroups. So we're going to see the results overall. Again, you see it at the very top, and then you see by race and ethnicity the percent positive, 3 through 5, and then in gray, you see the 6 through 12% positive. Then we look at ELL status, yes, the response for ELL students, and then no, students that are not, or MLL. And likewise for SPED, free and reduced lunch, and we actually had an indicator for chronically absent for this school year. Students that were chronically absent between the beginning of school year and I believe it was the end of February were flagged, so we could know, and you definitely see a difference. Now, one thing I want you to pay attention to, which is a good sign, if you look at grades 3 through 5 by ELL status, there was no difference in the positive response of ELL students versus non-ELL. 48% positive, which of course was the overall. So that is one area where there's no difference between the two. We do see a difference in grades 6 through 12. And I did a comparison to these breakdown for 2024, and there was very little difference. There were certainly differences, free and reduced lunch, but the magnitude of the difference is just about the same for those past 2 years. Any questions about that? Oh, also, we checked to make sure that the demographics of the respondents were representative of our population, and there's no doubt about that. Next. Staff leadership relationships. We heard about this last night. This is really a very strong topic for us. If you click one more time, you'll see the staff relationship. So there's been an increase since 2022 in the percent positive by 14 percentage points. In that amount of time, you see every year an increase in the percent positive for staff leadership. So we can see that those relationships between our leaders and our teachers are growing very strong. Okay. Next. Family responses to school safety. There's been an increase in 4 percentage points since 2024. And this, even though the responses are anonymous, we do have some background questions that our respondents can answer if they choose to. So you see that you see a positive trend, but you also see the percent of positive response by race or ethnicity. Now, about close to 80% of the respondents chose to answer that background question. But based upon those that did respond, you can see the percent positive. Next. As we mentioned yesterday, there were 2 topics that were common to all stakeholder surveys, and that was school safety and school climate. And we are happy to say that for school safety, you see in comparison to last year, fairly large increases. In some cases for students, you see underneath the percent point increase, the words greatest increase. That means for all the topics that students were surveyed on, this particular topic, school safety, had the highest increase. School climate also had a high increase. And you know, that really shows the quality and character of overall student life. And as we mentioned yesterday, you know, we have a lot of initiatives. One of them is critical thinking, and the impact of school safety and school climate truly does give students an environment where they can really dig deep, ask questions, disagree, really start to be critical thinkers. Next, please. All right, any questions about the survey? I know you heard a lot of this yesterday, but is there anything you would like to ask or know more about in terms of the results?
Diane, is there anything just big picture that jumps out at you that you would say deserves more attention?
In terms of support?
Yes, and also just in the numbers that you're providing, like, is there anything that you're seeing in the panorama and some of those responses that you would think would need more attention in terms of the support that would be provided to make those differently?
Student engagement is something that we really need to focus on next year, particularly at the 6 through 12 level. The percent positive at that level for student engagement was 27%. I can tell you if you go back to 2022, it was 25%. It is the lowest percent positive of any of those topics. If I look at school engagement at the elementary level, it too is flat, although it's at a higher level. But I would think if I had to pick one area, student engagement would be the one.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, I guess we'll start taking a look at grade 11 Connecticut SAT results. So our students in the beginning of April took this is students in grade 11, took the Connecticut SAT. And as you know, that is now the state test for high school that's part of our next generation accountability reporting. And we know that we had a school in 2024 based upon that report, Norwalk High School, that became a focus school in ELA. So there's been a big effort at all of our high schools to address ELA and mathematics, not just at grade 11, but just to raise the bar across. And the work right now, I really want you to pay attention to 2025. This is very preliminary results. This is not the state reporting of results, which eliminates students that are newly arrived, eliminates students that were not with the school or with the district for the full school year. I would say, and it doesn't include all of the test results yet, but probably close to 90% of it. So we have to look when it truly is preliminary results. And we're looking at proficiency. So what does that mean? Proficiency really is when you think of the scale scores on the SAT. Remember the SAT, the scores go from 200 to 800. Well, for a student to be proficient, that student would need to, in ELA, be at a 480, and for math at a 530. So that would be the minimum scores that students would need. And you can see over this 3-year period, the trend overall and then by subgroup. And you see that in ELA, it looked like we made a gain of 10.7 percentage points. And in math, 2.9 percentage points. So, this looks very promising. This is not the metric that is used to next gen accountability, but it's the basis. It's the first part of the reporting, because we're going to be looking at the district and school performance index, and that's what will be used. But we can see that our Hispanic students in ELA and our Black students in ELA, very, very, very good result. And MLL results look low, but in many cases, the test is not appropriate for students that are maybe at a loss level of 1 or 2. But even there, a huge difference from 1.8 percentage points, I'm looking again at ELA, to 4% proficient. It's huge. Any questions?
That's very interesting.
Yeah. But we'll have to see how this plays out, but it certainly looks very promising.
Diana, are you going to talk about the SPED students?
Yeah, a huge difference. Is there something that you want to add to that, Allison?
No, I just wanted to acknowledge the growth that students with disabilities made. So there was a 10-point gain for that population of students as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions, I'm going to transition to the next speaker. And Paul, I'm going to stop sharing at this point. If you could get ready to share your slides. Let me know if you have issues, Paul, and then I'll just put mine right back up.
They should be good.
You're great. I could see
okay.
them.
Never heard that before, so great. Thank you. Great. Affirmation. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Those that know me, Paul Forbes. I am the founder of Leading with Hearts and Minds, and I'm out of town right now in Pennsylvania My mom is celebrating her 87th birthday. She had a little bit of medical issues, and so she's in a rehab center, but it was good to be with her and my other sister, Debbie, just um, celebrate her 87th year and her revolution around the sun. So it was good to be here. So um, she wasn't happy that I had to go to be here, but I said, next to her, the next best thing I would have is to be in a space with my friends from NPS. So thank you for having me. Let me just put my 10 minute because I could do this for 10 hours and y'all aren't gonna be happy with me. So let me just get going. This year, just around this time last year, I was given the opportunity to meet with, reconnect with Marianne. I met Sandra, reconnect with Allison. And I just want to say a special shout out, thank you, appreciation. Alex, I had met with Dr. Estrella. I'd known from New York City. And so we reconnected as well. But just having a meeting to think about the work and the vision, the plans for. And as results of that, as you see, I created a slide with just a touch point. It was, interesting as I recap as the year's not completely yet, but just thinking about the touch points and for all the work I do across the country, different districts. This is a district where, as I realized, the only month that I didn't have a touch point was February, right? So from July when I had that admin retreat, and then the central team retreat, and it's going through to just this week, Monday, where I started the week up at Rowayton, doing a session with them, late afternoon, starting at 4 o'clock and ended at 5:30. It's just been amazing. I've really appreciated, but again, special thanks and appreciation to Allison, to Sandra, and especially to Marianne, who has been just there for me throughout. Any questions I had, thought partner. So gratitude. Um, in a few minutes I have, if I'm going to just open up and just have a conversation or questions, I just want to think about again the meeting that we had, thinking about how we, as a word that's been used, how do we braid this work? How do we make sure that folks aren't sitting in silos and believing, oh, this is just one more thing on my plate? But as we think about the different initiatives, as people say, competing initiatives and competing priorities, that we reframe and reimagine that and say it's not competing, it's completing, right? And so how we come together, and that's been a big part for me as I do this work and trying to honor what was asked of me by, again, Sandra, Allison, and Marianne. And so I've had that kind of idea of synergy. I'm a person who's worked with Dr. Fergus in New York City, and I've worked with other partners in general, is knowing that, again, this is about coming together to find out how we have synergy and connect. And so um, doing this work and connecting and seeing this timeline, realizing that I haven't touched base with every school directly, but I've touched base with the principal, the assistant principal, the equity leads, and again, appreciation of how that vision came together, where I was going to meet a number of times this year with the principal in a half day, the assistant principals as a half day, and originally it was going to be a half day with the equity leads. But again, vision, leadership, Mary Ann, the team said, can we make that a full day? And I was like, absolutely. And I think that was, again, to begin with, just saying that was, I believe, part of the game changer, the opportunity to come together. And other pieces that we really didn't think of. The central team was not in there. The paraprofessionals were not in there. And that came, right? The organic way in which it came together to say, how is it that we believe in equity, and how do we ensure that equity means all and that everyone gets an opportunity to see, to understand, have the same language as we're going through this work. And so I go through here, and so you'll see this, and I try to edit to add for November. I should have had Nathan Hill in there. I wrote it down, but I don't know, it didn't go through, so I'll make sure in the master schedule that we have that in there. Sandra, but I corrected it here. But it came to March and May. I didn't have May in there because part of what I've done is I believe I'm a storyteller. I think it's important that we tell our story. I understand this idea of quantitative work and data, and I'm very much about the qualitative, not an either or. It's a both and, right? And so I speak a lot with stories. I memorialize events, opportunities. I think it's important that we hear the story. I appreciate what Diane just shared Alden, I know, again, we talk about, again, the data, the numbers. Dr. Fergus, I appreciate. And it's important that we tell our story because there's a story behind each one of those data points, right? And so I look here and see what Rowayton did, right? And the touch points, you'll see a picture of Dr. Casey, principal. You see Kelly, the AP. You see me meeting in the bottom right-hand corner with the equity team the first time I went in March. And then after that, it was moved into a session with the whole staff because they were taking the work that we were discussing about identity, a project I started in New York City and what my sister school is a principal in East Harlem. And it was I am, we are, right? And then being invited to come back, like I said, to begin this week to follow up on that as we continue to build and think about, again, not to compete, but to complete. And this idea of this isn't a new thing. It's not something more your plate, but let's think about what we're currently doing in pedagogy and practices and policies and connecting, braiding, synergy. And so that's been special for me, right? But I will say there were a few poignant moments this year as I reflect, and I continue to reflect as I'm not completed yet throughout the year. But you're going to see two pictures here. And the one to the left, you're going to see one of the equity leads. And this is Beverly. She's at Brian McMahon High School. This was on November 5th. If you saw from the timeline, November 5th, I was at the central office with the central district team, and I left there and I did a 90-minute session over at Nathan Hale. And at some point, those who have met me, I'm a big boy. I can't be at all places at all times, right? I'm not that big, and so I'm not able to be everywhere. Someone sent me this picture on the left where you have Beverly, who was in a session in September and again October. So you're talking about a total of 12 hours that she was with me and in this space with the equity leads. And I was very touched because on that slide, as it's customized to who she is, with her voice and her presentation to her colleagues, she was doing activity that the principals had done, that the APs had done, that the equity leaders had done, and that I had brought to the space. And again, this is not about me, it's about us. Completing, not competing. How do we build capacity? Which again was part of the messaging that I heard from Allison, from Sandra, from Marianne. And so seeing that when that was sent to me, it meant the world to me, right? It resonated in a way that, again, a data point may not get it to see we achieved this or check, but it was about, again, that story that we were building capacity that folks were beginning to take ownership of as they learn with and from each other. That was November 5th. About a month later, we're wrapping up the year. In my last session for the calendar year of 2024, the session with the equity leads ends. And one of our equity leads, Barbara, who's at Cranberry, I believe it is. Yeah, she's at Cranberry. So you have a high school. Cranberry is elementary, I believe, right? Is that correct? Elementary is correct. So they're there, and Barbara says, "Oh, this is Thursday." She says, "Well, Monday, I've been asked to do a presentation." She's actually going through the email in that picture there. And then everyone's gone. I was wrapping up, getting ready to leave. And here was Bev, who had a month later done a presentation. And she said, "I want to share what I did." And it was that for me, again, people talk about, moments, right? That was a great way for me to end out the calendar year as reflected on what was going on. Because I had to memorialize that moment as Beverly's sitting there getting the information to share with Barbara so she could have that for her to make her own and do it her group, right, in her school. That was important. And I thought maybe that could be the highlight of, but like they're doing the infomercials, but there's more, right? So I get to a point where I'm like, okay, this is great. I can retire at this point because I don't need to do any more. This is wonderful. But the year continued, and I remember having a conversation with Barbara and Bev and making sure and it went well. And an email I got from both of them, appreciation, and everything, and that's wonderful. But again, I think about building capacity. It was this moment. I'm going to wrap up with this. It was this moment in March. It's the last session. I had the principals, the APs were the day before, the day before that. I'm wrapping up, and this is lunchtime. And by just looking at this picture, you won't know everyone necessarily, but there were so many stories happening and playing out in this space. And what you won't know is that in this space, we have Allison in the top right-hand corner, sitting, speaking to someone looking to her left. She's a student teacher who has spent the year with Amanda, and she's asked, can I come to the session? She reached out to Marianne. Marianne said, reach out to Paul and find out. I was like, yeah, absolutely. Come one, come all. So there's a young lady in college who's been in this school, student teacher, and she comes in and she's at a session. Next to her is Shayna, who's at Marvin. She was an intern who came to the second session and she stayed. She loved what she experienced. She stayed. When you look around to my time just went off, I'm gonna give another couple seconds and then I'm gonna open it up. To the next on the top, you see Dr. Samuel, you see Brenda. These are new folks who had never, this is their first meeting in the equity team, as they were replacing someone who had started as an equity lead. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, you see Jen from Rowayton speaking to John from Jefferson. Again, and part of what I'm doing is also saying, I'm saying names because that was a big thing for me, the connections, the stories, the intergroup contacts that was occurring here based on experience of a veteran teacher who's been there for 20, 25 years with someone who was there for a couple of days. We're talking about literally age. We're talking about grade level. All of that was part of the beloved community that we're trying to create here and then replicate at our schools. And so for me, I was sitting there watching as the lunch was playing out. And so I just want to end with, again, you should be able to hear it. This is a 30-second clip of what you just saw, but I recorded this as I just want to be a reminder of why I do this work and why this work is so important and why these folks are saying, please, can we continue this? Don't make it episodic. Let's make sure we're continuing. So let me just play this short clip. Folks, let me just stop sharing this point. For some of us, we might watch that and think like, oh, Paul, okay, what is that? That's special. That's about an opportunity for us to come together, to connect in ways that we might not have thought about before. There were folks who came to that first session in September, and were like, okay, we're here. Why am I here? What is this? What am I about? Some of those questions that came up, let me just check out what we're trying this week and this month and this year. And we help to create a beloved community of connections where we're celebrating birthdays that I could say, all these years I worked with, I never knew Marianne's birthday is March 15th, right? Beware the Ides of March, right? Well, also there was another, a colleague in another school who also had the 15th, right? And so I remember those are the connections that we make and we get to know. And that was part of what we learned. And there's so much more I could share. I only have a limited amount of time, so I'm gonna pause there. But I will say, as I share and provide feedback, the message from especially the equity leads was that we hope this is not just a moment in time. We hope this is not episodic. We hope that a commitment is made and they actually begged. That last session, I can tell you a lot that was said, and also in the office hours. Please, leadership, we're asking that we continue this, that we create the time and space for these relationships to occur, that we could build capacity and that we can turnkey and bring that back, whether Paul is there or not. We would love for Paul to be there, but whether Paul is there or not, the message was, we want to get better, we want to grow, we want to learn, and we need to create time and a space for this. So thank you. Like I said, I could go on for another hour. Y'all won't be happy with that, but I want to say again, appreciation, love, and respect. So I'm going to open it. Questions, comments, feedback, thoughts.
Do you have any questions, Howard? I was going to ask a question, but I defer to you if you've got a question.
No, not at all. Just listening to what's going on. So I'm good.
So, Mr. Forbes, I will ask, is there anything that you learned about our district that you didn't know before? And what surprised you the most when you came here to do the work with the district?
How much time do we have? Listen, Sherry, that's a lot in there. The work that I do is about examining and addressing our bias-based beliefs. I shared this on Monday with Rowayton. When Marianne called me, even though I have been asked and told by a couple of people, some people have worked in New York City who's run the CBO organization, had said, Paul, you got to come to Connecticut. I didn't know much about Connecticut in terms of any of the work. I'd heard some things of, oh, you're needed, you're needed. So obviously, as a human being, we internalize certain things and make the assumptions, right? And that's part of the work that I do, right? Examine our bias-based beliefs. And so I had beliefs. I didn't know. I wanted to know, but I want to be careful not to pervert or be affected by what I thought of this and that. So I really was a blank slate as much as possible, even though I had heard they need it, Connecticut needs you, right? Um, I speak about, and I'm not saying this because I'm on here. Anyone who is hearing this and heard me, I speak about NPS and the way in which, again, beginning with, and again, not just saying it because I'm here, they've heard this from me, they're probably embarrassed, but Sandra, Allison, especially again, Marianne, just touching base and saying, let's think this through, let's brainstorm, let's be thought partners. I speak about this district and people say, what should we do going forward? Paul, do you want to work with it? I've learned so much about what's possible. The equity team leads can tell you, if you spoke to them, that's my family, right? It was what's possible and what could be created when we make the commitment and we stand by it and we say not just a half hour or a half day or just a ton. They really are saying we got very nervous when we didn't know whether a session was happening in March because we hadn't gotten a reminder email, and because of the social political landscape, they thought maybe, oh, did the leadership in Norwalk fold and we're not doing this? So the people who spoke about that, equity leads, who said we were just hoping that we were having a final session and they got nervous. So when you ask about it, I've learned so much. I try to suspend my biases as much as is possible. And I came with an open mind. And I think part of it is also prior relationships. So Marianne and I had, knew each other and stuff. So I was like, okay, I knew Alex and the work she was doing. I mean, I knew that. And I know Dr. Fergus, and I know Dr. Fergus is going to do again, the quantitative, and that's not my ministry. That's not my area of expertise. And I know the work behind the work that needs to be done. So I've learned so much. I also things are different and approaches and the universes of whether I'm in the Midwest, whether I'm in the South, whether I'm in the North, whether I'm in New York City, this idea of we're looking, just like our young people want to be seen and heard and validated, we're all looking for that. That's what we need at the core. And creating this space, creating a beloved community has allowed for that to happen. And folks are saying, we just hope this is not a one. And again, it's not just about Paul Forbes, right? I know my worth. I know how good I am. I could do that. But it's about them saying, we want to have that so we can continue. And so the ask has been, how can this continue and ensure the leadership, whatever that looks like, with leadership, understand we need to maintain this and keep this spirit, this work continuing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's what I hope too, that the culture that's being created will continue for a long time. No matter who the leadership is, hopefully this is something that will, become a part of our district, particularly in the climate that we are in now politically. This is very important.
I couldn't agree with you more. Are we okay to move on? Do you think, Sherry? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And I think Paul highlighted our equity leads, which is something that we will be talking about a little bit more at the end of this presentation, forecasting for next year. But I'm going to share my presentation, and I'm actually going to invite Marianne to speak to the next portion as soon as I get it up.
Great, thank you. Good evening, board members. It's a pleasure to be here. I think I want to just thank Paul for kind of queuing me up. This concept of braiding has been an ongoing concept. And as you heard Paul speak to the qualitative, the story behind the numbers, we're going to talk about another kind of component of the work that we've been working to integrate or braid throughout the year. And that's our partnership with Rutgers University. Next slide. So last month, we had our third and final round of equity school visits with Dr. Eddie Fergus and the equity lab team from Rutgers University. And the purpose of these equity school visits has been to support these schools with the implementation of their school improvement plan equity goal. So each school, just as a reminder, identifies an equity goal that they will work on over the course of the year. Usually it's focused on reducing an area of disproportionality that they see in their data. So this could be access to accelerated math classes. It could be reducing disproportionality in suspension data, chronic absenteeism. It could be reading interventions, for example. And so this third and final visit, the agenda for those visits is down on the bottom right, consisted of 3 portions. So the first part of the visit focused on the team meeting with the principal and the members of the equity team to kind of hear, where's the school now? Kind of implementation updates, to review some data, any artifacts related to that. But we don't want to have these meetings just simply exist in just looking in the data in a room. And so the second part of the visit is where the team along from the school and from Rutgers gets out and walks around the school building. So this could be walking through classrooms or a variety of other spaces, but they're collecting that kind of qualitative or observation data that's going to help kind of think about where do we see progress, where are we not seeing progress, and the why are we seeing that progress and where are we not. So, and after kind of gathering that data from those learning walks, they come back and they help the team to debrief and to identify next steps. I think what's exciting, and we wanted to take this opportunity to share it with you, is some of these updates that the Rutgers team shared with us. And they were really celebrating both the progress that schools are making with their goals, but also just how they're approaching this work. So the first one, they cited multiple cases of where they're seeing shifts in systems and structures resulting in more sustainable improvements. So if we think about access to accelerated math classes, for example, in the beginning of our partnership with Dr. Fergus, the school's action plan might have just been to identify the students that we can move into that accelerated math class. But now we're seeing with a team, through the support from district team as well as Rutgers, is they're thinking about how do we need to revamp our identification and recommendation processes so that we're creating processes that are going to ensure that we are addressing this disproportionality each year versus it just being kind of a one-off. And what's exciting is that we've seen multiple cases where an individual school's equity goal is having ripple effects on other schools. So we have a high school where they focused on recommendations for honors math in 9th grade, and their work has now trickled down into the middle school that's sending students. And we're seeing those middle school and high school leaders have very strong conversations. And so the high school is thinking about what they need to do differently, but now the middle school is also thinking about what they need to do differently. And we've had that happen also from the articulation from 5th grade to 6th grade, the elementary schools and with the middle schools. They were able to celebrate and share the fact that they could see strong evidence of school leaders utilizing the metrics on the principal's dashboard. That Mr. Burnham here on the call, of course, has been a labor of love, and he's been so supportive and responsive to the schools. And that principal's dashboard is just helping them to really progress monitor their work in real time. So it's not always waiting to get the data from an upload or a download, but like having access to real-time data has been very successful. And these last 2 bullets are really about like, how are we approaching this work? And so do we have system gaps or do we have implementation gaps? So, I can give an example of where if a school is focusing on reducing suspension data, from a system standpoint, do we have a team of people focused on supporting kids who might be exhibiting some challenging behaviors? Do we have a process to come up with behavior support plans for children? And if we don't have those things, then we might have a system gap. But if we do have those systems in place and we're still not seeing the success that we want, we need to start to think about where we might have implementation gaps. So we might have that team, we might have that process, but an example of an implementation gap might be, but are we training the teachers who work with that child day in and day out on how to help support the child with that behavior support plan? If we don't have that process and that component in place, then that might be the implementation gap that's preventing us from realizing the full success that we want. And that's just an example. The last one is also thinking about, as we are developing our action plans and refining, making sure that we're focusing on the root causes and not just the symptoms. And I can give just a quick example of, a school that I was talking with just recently, and they're looking at how their students are making progress through the reading intervention process. And they've identified some students that have made the type of progress they want to see, and then there were some students who have not. And so the conversation immediately started thinking about, well, what is it about our reading intervention programs and resources that's not working? But as they dug down deeper into the data, they started to see that there, for a couple of kids, there were attendance concerns. And so if the child's not in school, then they're not engaging with the level of intervention and resource and support that we want. And so we could keep swapping out those reading interventions, but if the child's not in school, and this it wasn't the case for everybody, but it was the case for a couple of students. And so, if we don't address the attendance component, the root cause, how we address through the reading interventions isn't going to gain the traction that we want. And so those are just some of the updates that I wanted to share on behalf of the team. And I'm more than willing, of course, to answer any questions that you might have.
You said a mouthful, Ms. Shepherd.
I tend to do that.
No, it's a lot, and it's interesting. Of course, we always like to see the results and the work that's being done around equity, since that is something that is very near and dear to me, and that's very critical to our district. So it's really good to see this information, juxtaposed with the numbers that we saw earlier from Ms. Filardo. So the work continues.
Absolutely.
The work does continue. And actually, we will be engaging the Rutgers team in another audit. And so you'll get, again, some of that quantitative data that Eddie presents to us often. So we're going to be doing another one of those audits very soon. If we are okay to move on, I'm going to keep us moving. And Alden actually was going to take us through this portion of my brother's keeper and my sister's keeper, because he has been engaging with Kadir and Lashante in this work, and how is it that we are capturing the experience of these students as mentees, but then also measuring the impact of the program. So Alden, I'm happy to advance to the timeline.
Perfect. Thank you, Sandra. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I assume that's a yes. So yeah, I thank you, Sandra, and I'm really it was cool to hear about all of the kind of puzzle. There's obviously a lot of people with various different life experiences and where I come in is to kind of like Marianne and like Diane, approach things from a quantitative perspective. For the most part, that's my expertise. But you'll see in this presentation that I also lean quite a bit into the qualitative data as well. Certain program evaluations demand it, and like Paul told you about, there's a lot of grading and synergy and culture work being done that can only really be measured with qualitative means. So you'll hear about that. But in terms of the timeline of my brother's keeper and my sister's keeper, and yes, we've been doing this work for a few years now, but Sandra's really only taken on a role in the program this year. The original program actually started in 2014 in New York. It was part of the Obama administration. And then we adopted it, and my sister's keeper actually branched out of that. And the reason I highlight this timeline is because when we were actually figuring out what the program does or is meant to do, or developing activities and things that kids should be participating in, it wasn't exactly clear. It's not like a curriculum. It's like a set of do this and then kids' reading scores will improve. It's a lot looser defined than that. And that has been a wonderful asset to Lashante and Q, who have done some really great work in the program, but that has also presented some of the challenges that we've seen when it comes to trying to measure the outputs in terms of the program. So if you get to the next slide, the theory of action, when I sat down with Lashante and Q and asked, what is this program trying to do? Some of the things that I heard were building student confidence and getting them to connect with mentors. This stuff lines up with what the Obama administration has as their mission statement, but a lot of these things are kind of ill-defined. So working with them, we came a little bit closer towards this theory of action. So focusing on relationship building, mentorship, and curricula that focuses on Black excellence. And we more clearly define the outputs of the program this fall as well, focusing on academic identity, cultural competence, critical consciousness, and connections with others. If you go to the next slide here, Sandra, this comes out of some of the literature about Black students and defining a culture of achievement. So the way that we kind of thought about it and operationalized it was in terms of curricula that talk about academic excellence as a piece of honoring Black culture, and racial achievement ideology, which is a rather new science, very exciting and cutting edge. And some of the complexities of that phenomena are very difficult for most adults to wrap their heads around. So it's an ambitious program to try to get students to grapple with these concepts. They're really Freudian concepts. They come from the pedagogy of the oppressed, but some really powerful ideas that students are engaging with. And those things are also connected to cultural competence, and the critical consciousness component that I've spoken about before. So those three kind of elements come together to form the foundation of what students in MBK and MSK are trying to achieve. So if you go to the next slide here, the events that have been conducted in MBK. So I tried to catalog these things as well. So there's been a lot of different events that have been done. Like monthly, they meet about different things that come up. It's been kind of flexible in some ways, but they've also done some really powerful trips that obviously connect to these three big elements about understanding Black culture, which has a history of fighting for excellence in education, and then also understanding cultural competence. So they visited the African American History Museum when they did their DC trip, and then the critical consciousness components. They've had some really flexible. They did a hip hop mindfulness session. So this has been a little bit more flexible in MBK and MSK, but in general, all of these events kind of fall into one of these three buckets, and that's why we're hoping to see that kind of overarching connection to the theory of change that I outlined at the top. So in terms of the qualitative data, which I thought was the most promising stuff that we've seen, we did focus group interviews this winter with students from both programs. LaShante and Q led these interviews, and they met with these students, and we recorded and transcribed the interviews and coded them for certain themes that emerged. And what you'll note here is that they connect very clearly towards the concepts that I've flagged at the top. So one of these students said this quote here, it tells you that MBK tells you that it's cool to go to college, it's cool to be successful, it's cool to be a leader, and it's cool to be a young Black man and be an example. So MBK helps you just being confident as a Black student, but not just as a Black man, but as a Black student. And that really connects with a lot of these complex concepts around Black student achievement and the history of that. And it's really tapping into some fascinating themes that we've seen with cultural competence. I think this is a really good exemplar of like how students are grappling these rather nuanced concepts. Other qualitative data emerges here. I don't want to talk too much about this because I know it's already 7 o'clock, but a lot, MSK echoed similar things. So the MSK students talked about, things being possible, them seeing things as possible that they didn't see as possible before because of internalized stereotypes. And on the next slide here, Sandra, the exemplars theme came up several times. So MSK did like a women's panel where they had Black women who had gone into different occupations and careers and been successful come, and the students talked very glowingly about that, not just because some of them are mentors and they connect with them, but also because they get to see different examples of Black women in positions where they seem to actually not have internalized that could be them one day without MSK. And that's a really powerful thing. We saw similar quotes in MBK as well. And then the last slide here was just about kind of positive affirmations, and these things came up as well as like ways that we saw students talking in really powerful ways about the connection that they made with adults. one of them referred to it as reprogramming their brains to think positively about themselves. You can't really put a price tag on that. That's incredibly valuable if programs are doing that. And all of these things are like happening in the quotes. They got us very excited when we started to see this in the qualitative data. And if you go to the next slide here, Sandra, the quantitative data has been a little bit less like clear in terms of like it really connecting to the theory of action. So, Diane shared some really encouraging, quantitative data from the Panorama survey about adult relationships, and that piece being a strong growth that we've had in Norwalk Public Schools. The quantitative data for My Brother's Keeper and My Sister's Keeper, looking at the things that we wanted to see growth in. So connection to adults, connection to school, engagement in school. We haven't really, at least in the preliminary analyses, seen the kind of quantitative results that we want to see. When you look at students that are in MBK compared to similar students that are not in MBK, they don't appear very different. And so we've kind of expanded our definition of what the program is trying to optimize. We've looked at grading data. A couple of anecdotes that came out of the focus groups. Students said that like, oh, I've gotten my grades up since joining this program. But we, again, like haven't seen that on average that appears to be the case. And so I guess that the kind of next steps for this are really clearly defining and operationalizing what the program is trying to do and how it relates to those quantitative outcomes so that we can measure progress. And this connects with a lot of what Marianne already told you about, like the nature of improvement science. Like we have to define what we want to measure and how we want to define where the program's going in order to progress monitor and make adjustments when needed. So those will be some of the next steps that we'll be looking into with LaShante and Q over the summer, and we're excited to dig into that work and hopefully bring together kind of the nexus of the education values, the qualitative data that we saw really profoundly with the quantitative data that people like great work. So hopefully we can use both of those means to really tell the story of this program.
I do want to point out, though, that just if I may add to Alden, it's just that we didn't see a huge difference between our Black students and our students that were within the program, their responses compared to other Black or Latino students that were not. It's not that their results were worse. So I want to make sure that we are signaling that. The other piece that Alden and I talk about this a lot because we try to wrap our mind around how do you start to sort of measure impact of various programs. Another piece that we were talking about is when they're answering questions about Panorama or about their school environment, do they just see this as the overall picture of who am I within my school versus when they're answering questions that are directed and they're taking it during MBK or MSK, are they answering questions about who they are within that program? And so I think we need to really talk to the students about how they're also approaching the responses to these questions in a Panorama survey. But it just gives us things to think about, like how we're measuring how students' sense of belonging and engagement are when we're talking about our Black and Brown students. And you can't do one, you can't do the quantitative without the qualitative. But at some point, we want the quantitative to start to move because we want them to have better outcomes academically and within this is what we're here for, right? To make sure that we're closing those gaps.
Would it make sense to note on the Panorama if one is in the program, or would it not make?
We do. We actually disaggregate. Go ahead, Alden. Do you want to talk about it?
I was just going to say, yeah, so we've had some internal conversations about this. There's kind of two different ways we're approaching it. One is that we might just give a measure of belonging and engagement to students when they're at MBK, right? Like that's a pretty obvious way to get around it. The issue is that you do need like pre-test, post-test data to do that, which is why and the second thing that we're doing is really clearly defining like what exactly is it that we want this program to do. And that's tricky because I mean, you heard Paul talk about the wonderful things that we saw with the equity leads, and they go off in many different directions. They talk about braiding and synergy and all of these wonderful concepts that are also they're intertwined and difficult to measure. And that's why we can really know if we're seeing progress in those things is to ask. But we
Right.
have to ask really strategically, and that's why we have to
Right.
define them ahead of time and then ask before and see how they develop over time.
Right.
But we're definitely having a lot of internal conversations.
That's good.
Any other questions?
If I just want to just add to this, I love this conversation, and I think it's Alden, I would love to speak more with you. I think there is a lot of pieces of going together with that as we try to use how do we define success,
Mhm.
evaluation, what we put in, input in, output. Like I think all that is connected because there are times when, again, we could feel like, oh, did we meet our goal as we defined it as what the goal is? And say, well, you went from a one, you didn't get from a one to a four, but within between one and two, you raised whatever percentage points, there's success. And all the time we say, oh, but we failed because this didn't happen. I think our young people internalize, which then come to the stereotype threats of how do I answer, like you said, those questions when I'm here with my boys or my group and my in group versus what happens when I'm with this. And so we might get different answers and feel like, oh, well, they don't feel like they belong. But sometimes I think we have to be very careful. And the equity leads had those discussions as well. So it's not just there, they're having discussions about how we're measured. Are we being successful? Was I not a good lead because I didn't lead a professional development? Did I not? All those pieces that come. So all of us are going through that. And I think that's part of what they're looking for from, again, I just say amorphously leadership. They're saying, help us define the terms because we don't want to feel as if we are less than or didn't do what you've asked us to do. And we believe we succeeded, but then I hear others and they've led PD, they've done this. Yeah, so I think I love this, and I really I wish we had the 18 more hours. But thank you, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That was a great conversation.
Yeah. That's good. Thank you
Thank
all. That was good
you.
information.
Thank you. I'm going to advance the slide. And Allison, I'm going to ask you to help me with this one also as we
Sure.
forecast for next year. And then Marianne and all of us, we could just tag team this piece.
Mhm.
We're coming to an end, so no worries.
Did you want me to start?
Yes, sure, please.
Okay. So one of the things that we have been talking about is now that we have been working with the Rutgers group for some time, one of the things that we wanted him to do at this point is to conduct an audit, a system-wide audit to see where we are now, and specifically identify areas that could be an area of focus for us moving forward. And so one of the things that we are doing as an organization as well is our schools have been doing a lot of work around creating systems and structures in their schools to disrupt disproportionality. But one of the things that we're thinking about as a district team is where are there areas where we can refine and make adjustments to our policies to better support the work that is happening in our schools. So for example, one of the things you'll see listed here is the high school program of study. And so really taking a look at the program of study and really seeing which courses are being offered and who they're being offered to and where we can make adjustments to the program of study to ensure that all of our students have a pathway to taking advanced classes or taking a pathway at the high school level and have an opportunity to have access to that. Did you want to jump in, Sandra?
Yes, thank you. The other piece that you will see also that we've included are we wanted to actually have a PD or a training on equitable grading. We actually started this the conversation with this group on the grading for equity. It was something that this ad hoc committee had been involved in from, I think even last year, the beginning of last year. But it has to be a greater conversation about the policies around grading, and it has to start with professional development for all our school leaders. So we carved out time in the summer where we're going to have all the school leaders start that training. And it's actually July 31st, if you want to stop on in and start the conversations there and get their voices and have them trained. And so that we can then impact how is it that we are approaching grading, and having that conversation start is one way that we're trying to impact some of the policies and procedures. The other piece that you will see is these designing specific experiences. So we will continue to do that. We continue to braid the work of the self with the system-wide work. So having Paul back, creating these affinity groups for students and expanding on the experiences that students are having. So taking it from the institutional to the personal, and then how is it that we are impacting students? That's something that we will continue to do. So a lot of what we've done this year, expanding that work, and a lot of thinking around how we measure that impact. Allison, do you want to talk about the school level approach with our equity leads, or Mary Ann and Paul's work with that also?
So some of the work that has already happened, you know, as Paul mentioned, he's been working with our equity leads, really, you know, building their capacity, engaging them in learning, building their own knowledge and confidence around the work, so that they can then begin to um, really support this work in their schools. And the leads are in different places. And some have already, as you saw, Beverly from Brian McMahon, are already, you know, leading, learning in their school communities around this work. But what we want to do is really identify where each school is and determine the specific supports that those individuals need for their particular school communities, and provide some individualized support with the schools, because schools are in different places and the communities are very different. And the equity leads are different. And so we really want to make sure that we're supporting the individualized needs of each of the leads as well as the school communities, as we go to the next level with this work.
I believe that that's all that we have for you, Mary Ann, unless you wanted to add anything, or Alden or Paul.
I think you captured it.
Okay. So Sherry and Howard, this was our wrap up, and we're happy to entertain any questions. We thank you ahead of time for letting us go over by 15 minutes.
Thank you for all the information. So I'm sure you probably told me this before. What schools are we doing this at now? Because I know it's not district-wide yet, right? I know it's at Brian McMahon. What are the other schools that were actually doing this work?
No, we're district-wide.
Or district-wide with the equity leads and the whole, because I know at one time it was just a few. Okay.
That was our big goal for this year, even with MBK and MSK, is that we go district-wide, because we needed to, no matter where their schools were at, and we recognize that, but we needed to have the touch points be at every school. And we created the equity leads and the system to have the equity leads in partnership with the school principal, so that we had that through line from our central office team, Paul being our central office team member also, but and making sure that we were touching every single school and supporting them where they were at. And next year, actually embedding some individualized coaching, now that we've had that experience with them over the whole course of the year. So yeah, it is district-wide, all of these initiatives.
Okay, that's perfect. Because I know, you know, we started off with just a few, right? That we were going to replicate. Okay.
So we've
when it comes to Brian McMahon and CGS, PTEC, and Norwalk High, they're considered two separate, right?
Correct.
So you don't have the same, okay.
They are considered separate. When we say
Right,
a school, we don't mean the
Yep.
campus, we mean
right.
representation from that
Yep.
particular school community. Norwalk High, separate from
Mhm.
P-TECH, CGS,
Mhm.
separate from Brian
Mhm.
McMahon,
Okay.
Concord, separate from PONUS.
Right. Okay, well, that's all I have. Howard, if you have nothing else,
Nope, I
I
know.
will.
Great
Are you
job,
good?
guys. Thank you for the information you shared. Excited to see where this is going to take us. I see this school year here alone, the progress that we have overcame from last year to where we're at. That's a big plus, and good work. Good work.
Thank you,
I
guys.
agree. I agree. Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
thank you, everyone. Motion to adjourn. It is now 7:16 p.m.
I second it.
Thank you, everyone, for your time, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
everybody.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Diane.